They poured beer on the Virgin Mary statue. But what happened next silenced the bar. What began as drunken mockery became something that transformed a room full of skeptics into believers. The final pour sat on the corner of Burnham and 23rd, like an old dog that refused to leave its post. From the outside, it looked like 1,000 other neighborhood taverns scattered across Milwaukee's working-class South Side, brick facade darkened by decades of weather, neon beer signs flickering in windows that hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration, and a wooden door so warped by winter cold and summer heat that it took 2 good yanks to open. But step inside, and you'd find something different, not cleaner or fancier. The linoleum was still cracked, the air still thick with the ghost of 1,000,000 cigarettes smoked before the smoking ban. The jukebox still skipped on the 3rd track, but different in a way that was harder to define. There was a weight to the silence between conversations, a respect in the way regulars spoke to each other, a sense that this wasn't just a place to drink, but a place where people came to be human without judgment. That atmosphere was entirely due to Maria Gonzalez, who had owned and operated the Final Pour for 43 years. At 71, Maria was a small, sturdy woman with silver hair that she kept pinned in a neat bun, and hands that had poured more drinks, wiped more tears, and offered more comfort than any priest in the archdiocese. She had bought the bar in 1981, with money saved from 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and working the breakfast shift at a diner, after her husband Carlos died in an industrial accident, leaving her with 3 children and a determination to create something lasting. The regulars at the Final Pour knew Maria's story, though she never told it herself. They knew she had put all 3 kids through college working 16-hour days, that she had never missed a single one of their graduations or weddings, that she still sent money to her elderly mother in Guadalajara every month. They knew she opened early for Bobby Kowalski, because his dialysis appointments meant he could only drink coffee between 7 and 8 in the morning, and that she stayed late for Linda Chen, because Linda's husband worked nights, and she couldn't sleep in an empty house. What most people noticed first about the Final Pour, though, wasn't Maria's kindness or the bar's worn-in comfort. It was the statue. She stood on the center of the back bar, between a bottle of Jameson and a bottle of Tanqueray, elevated on a small wooden platform that Carlos had built before he died. The Virgin of Guadalupe, hand-painted on plaster, about 8 inches tall, with flowing blue robes and hands pressed together in eternal prayer. Her face was delicate, almost fragile, with downcast eyes that seemed to hold both infinite sadness and infinite compassion. The statue had belonged to Maria's mother, Elena, who had carried it from Mexico to Texas in 1952, then to Milwaukee in 1963 when Carlos found work at the foundry. Elena had always kept it on her kitchen windowsill, where morning light would catch the carefully painted gold trim on the Virgin's robe and make it seem to glow. When Elena died in 1979, she pressed the statue into Maria's hands and whispered, "She will watch over you wherever you go, Mija. She understands the hearts of those who suffer." For 43 years, the statue had presided over the Final Pour from her perch behind the bar. She had watched Maria's children grow up, doing homework at the corner table while their mother worked. She had been present for countless confessions, whispered over late-night drinks, for celebrations and wakes, for the 1,000 small dramas that played out in any neighborhood bar, where the same faces gathered night after night. The regulars had grown accustomed to her presence. Some, like old Pete Novak, who had been coming in since the week Maria opened, would nod to the statue when they arrived, a gesture of respect for something they might not have believed in, but recognized as important to Maria. Others, like Sandra Williams, a nurse who worked the trauma unit at St. Joseph's, would sometimes leave a dollar bill folded at the statue's base after particularly hard shifts. Not quite a prayer, but something close to it. Most people, though, simply accepted the Virgin as part of the bar's landscape, no more remarkable than the Packers schedule taped to the mirror or the faded photo of Carlos hanging near the cash register. She was just there, a quiet presence that somehow made the final pour feel less like a place to escape the world, and more like a place to find your way back to it. That changed on a cold Thursday night in late October, when Jake Morrison and his friends stumbled through the warped door, bringing with them the kind of loud, aggressive energy that Maria had learned to spot from across the room. Jake was 26, tall and lanky, with the kind of carefully disheveled appearance that suggested he spent considerable time making himself look like he didn't care how he looked. He worked in IT for a mid-sized accounting firm, a job that paid well enough to support his lifestyle of craft beer, expensive sneakers, and an apartment in the gentrifying neighborhood just north of downtown. But money couldn't fix the restless anger that had been gnawing at him since high school, the sense that life was a cruel joke and anyone who believed otherwise was either naive or lying to themselves. Jake's anger had roots that went deeper than he was willing to examine. He had grown up in a devoutly Catholic household where his mother attended daily mass and his father served as a deacon. His childhood had been structured around church activities, religious education, and family prayers that felt more like performances than conversations with God. When his parents divorced during his junior year of high school, a scandal that rocked their small parish, Jake's faith hadn't just wavered. It had curdled into something bitter and mocking. At college, he had discovered that deriding religion was an easy way to sound intelligent and sophisticated. He could quote Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, could dissect the historical inaccuracies of biblical stories, could mock the intellectual inconsistencies of belief with the casual cruelty of someone who had never been comforted by faith, but had certainly been wounded by its human representatives. Now, 6 years out of college, Jake's anti-religious stance had hardened into a kind of performance art. He collected stories of clerical scandals and religious hypocrisy the way other people collected baseball cards. He could work into any conversation his opinions about the damage done by organized religion, the stupidity of believing in fairy tales, the way faith was just a crutch for people too weak to face reality. His friends, Danny, a fellow programmer who shared Jake's love of craft beer and conspiracy theories, Marcus, a graphic designer who thought nihilism was an aesthetic choice, and Kevin, who mostly just laughed at whatever the other three said, enabled this behavior because it made them feel superior to the masses of believers who, in their minds, shuffled through life believing in obvious nonsense. They had chosen the final pour not because of its atmosphere or Mariah's reputation, but because it was cheap and close to the trendy restaurant where they had just finished dinner. They wanted somewhere to continue drinking without paying downtown prices, and the dive bar on the corner looked perfect for their purposes. From the moment they walked in, Maria could sense trouble. It wasn't just their volume, though they were certainly louder than the usual Thursday night crowd of factory workers and retirees. It was something about their energy, a kind of performative disrespect that she had learned to recognize over 4 decades of reading people across a bar. They commandeered a high-top table near the window, ordering round after round of Miller High Life because Jake thought it was ironic to drink the champagne of beers in a place like this. As the alcohol loosened their tongues, their conversation grew louder and more aggressive, touching on all their favorite topics: how stupid most people were, how religion was a scam designed to control the masses, how anyone who believed in God was essentially believing in Santa Claus. The other patrons began to shift uncomfortably. Pete Novak, nursing his usual old style at the end of the bar, kept glancing over at the loud table with obvious annoyance. Sandra Williams, who had stopped in for a quick drink after her shift, moved to a stool farther from the noise. Even Bobby Kowalski, who was usually game for any conversation, kept his attention focused on the Brewers game playing on the muted television above the bar. Maria watched it all with the patience of someone who had seen every type of drunk in every type of mood. She had dealt with angry drunks, sad drunks, philosophical drunks, and aggressive drunks. She had learned that most bad behavior in bars came from people who were hurting in ways they couldn't articulate, acting out because they had nowhere else to put their pain. But as Jake's voice grew louder and his stories more pointed, Maria felt something she rarely experienced in her own establishment: unease. Not fear. She had Pete Novak's nephew's phone number memorized, and Officer Martinez lived just 3 blocks away, but a sense that something was building toward a moment she wouldn't be able to prevent. The turning point came when Danny, pointing his beer bottle at the statue behind the bar, said something that made Jake's eyes light up with malicious glee. "Speaking of religious bullshit," Danny said, his words slightly slurred, "what's with the Virgin Mary shrine back there? This place trying to be a church or something?" Jake turned to look at the statue for the first time since entering the bar. He had noticed it peripherally, the way you notice background details in any unfamiliar space. But now he focused on it with the attention of someone who had found a target for his frustrated energy. "Oh, that's beautiful," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quieter bar. "The patron saint of dive bars, Our Lady of Last Call." His friends laughed, but it was the uncomfortable laughter of people who sensed their companion was about to cross a line, but felt powerless to stop him. Maria, who had been refilling Pete's beer, set down the bottle and turned to face Jake directly. Her voice was calm, but carried the authority of someone who had been in charge of this space for longer than Jake had been alive. "That statue belonged to my mother," she said simply. "She's been watching over this place and the people in it for 43 years. I'd appreciate it if you'd show her some respect." Jake looked at Maria for a long moment, taking in her small stature, her graying hair, her work-worn hands. In another context, he might have recognized the dignity in her bearing, the quiet strength that came from decades of taking care of other people. But alcohol and anger had narrowed his vision to a single point. Here was another person asking him to respect something he considered fundamentally ridiculous. "It's a piece of plaster," he said, loud enough for everyone in the bar to hear. "It's not watching over anything. It's just sitting there because people like to pretend their superstitions are real." The bar had gone completely quiet now. Even the jukebox seemed to have stopped, though no one could remember hearing the music end. Pete Novak turned fully around on his stool, his weathered face set in hard lines. Sandra Williams clutched her drink tighter, her knuckles white against the glass. "Son," Maria said, her voice still patient, but with an edge of steel underneath. "You're welcome in my establishment, as long as you're respectful to the other customers, and to me. That includes respecting the things that matter to me, even if you don't understand why they matter." Jake stood up from his table, swaying slightly as the alcohol and adrenaline hit his system simultaneously. His friends watched nervously as he approached the bar, recognizing the look on his face as the same one he got when he was about to say something particularly cutting in an online argument. "You know what your problem is," Jake said, positioning himself directly across from Maria with only the bar between them. "You and everyone like you. You think your feelings should determine how everyone else behaves. You think if something makes you feel good, that makes it true." He gestured towards the statue with a dismissive wave. "That thing isn't sacred. It doesn't have power. It's not protecting anyone. It's just a chunk of plaster that someone painted to look like a woman from a 2,000-year-old story, that probably never even happened. Maria's face remained calm, but Pete Novak stood up from his stool, and Bobby Kowalski had turned away from the television to watch the confrontation. The atmosphere in the bar had shifted from uncomfortable to tense, the way it feels just before a storm breaks. "Jake," Marcus called from the table, his voice uncertain. "Maybe we should just—" "No," Jake said, not taking his eyes off Maria. "I'm tired of tiptoeing around people's delusions. I'm tired of pretending that believing in fairy tales is somehow noble or beautiful or meaningful." He reached for his beer, a half-full pint of Miller High Life, and held it up like a prop in his performance. "You want to know what I think of your sacred statue? You want to know how much respect I have for your mother's precious virgin?" Maria's eyes widened as she realized what Jake was about to do. "Don't," she said, the single word carrying more authority and warning than any shouted threat. But Jake was beyond listening. The alcohol, the audience, and years of accumulated anger at every authority figure who had ever asked him to show reverence for something he didn't believe in had combined into a moment of pure, destructive impulse. "Here's what I think," he said, and raised the glass towards the statue. What happened next would be talked about in the final pour for years to come, though no two people would ever tell the story exactly the same way. Some details would remain constant: the smell, the silence, the way the light seemed to change. But other aspects would shift depending on who was telling the tale and how much they had been drinking when it happened. Jake poured the beer slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone in the bar could see what he was doing. The amber liquid cascaded over the statue's carefully painted head, running down her blue robes and pooling on the wooden platform where she stood. It should have been a moment of triumphant iconoclasm, the kind of gesture that would make for a great story later, about the time he showed a room full of believers what their sacred objects were really worth. Instead, something went wrong. The beer that hit the statue was golden and frothy, smelling of hops and yeast, and the slight staleness that came from sitting in a glass for 20 minutes. But as it flowed down the Virgin's painted robes, it began to change. The amber color faded, becoming lighter and clearer until it looked like pure, clean water. The smell of beer disappeared entirely, replaced by something impossible. The scent of roses, fresh and sweet and so strong that everyone in the bar could smell it instantly. "What the hell?" Danny whispered from the table, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The transformation of the beer was just the beginning. As the last drops fell from Jake's glass, 2 perfect streams of the now clear liquid began to flow from the statue's painted eyes. Not the random dripping of spilled beer finding its way down a surface, but deliberate, steady streams that fell like tears from the Virgin's downcast gaze onto the bar below. The sound was the most unnerving part. In a room full of people, with traffic passing outside and the ambient noise of a living city all around them, the only sound anyone could hear was the soft, rhythmic dripping of the statue's tears hitting the wooden bar. Drop, drop, drop. Each one seemed to echo through the silence like a heartbeat. Jake stood frozen, the empty glass still in his hand, staring at the impossible sight before him. The statue hadn't moved. Her hands were still pressed together in prayer, her head still tilted in that expression of infinite compassion. But something fundamental about her had changed. The painted features seemed more vivid, more real, as if someone had suddenly brought a photograph into sharp focus. Behind him, Marcus had pushed his chair back from the table so hard it had fallen over, but the crash made no sound in the unnatural quiet that had settled over the bar. Kevin's mouth was moving as if he were trying to speak, but no words came out. Danny was pointing at the statue with a shaking finger, his face pale as paper. Pete Novak, who had been a regular at the final pour since the day it opened, who had seen 3 decades of Milwaukee winters and summers pass by through these windows, was making the sign of the cross with hands that trembled like leaves in a strong wind. Sandra Williams had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears running down her cheeks as she stared at the weeping statue. But it was Maria's reaction that struck Jake the most profoundly. The woman who had stood up to him just moments before, who had faced down his mockery with quiet dignity, was now kneeling behind the bar, her hands clasped in front of her, her lips moving in silent prayer. Her face was radiant with something Jake had no name for. Not just belief, but recognition, as if she were seeing an old friend after a long absence. The scent of roses grew stronger, filling every corner of the bar with a sweetness that seemed to cleanse the air itself. The beer stains on the statue's robes began to fade, as if the paint were cleaning itself, leaving behind colors more vivid than they had ever been. The Virgin's face, which had always been beautiful in its simple craftsmanship, now seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the fluorescent bulbs hanging from the ceiling. And still the statue wept. Clear, pure tears that caught the light and seemed to hold it, falling in perfect rhythm onto the bar where they formed a small pool that reflected the overhead lights like a mirror made of starlight. Jake wanted to speak, to explain what was happening in rational terms, to find some logical explanation for what his eyes were seeing, and his nose was smelling, and his ears were hearing. But his throat felt thick and useless, and his mind, usually so quick with skeptical analysis, had gone completely blank. Instead, he found himself remembering things he had tried to forget. His first communion, when he was 7 years old, and the wafer had tasted like nothing but felt like everything. His grandmother's rosary, which she had worn smooth with decades of prayer, and which had always smelled faintly of the lavender soap she used. The way his mother had looked when she prayed, her face soft and peaceful in a way he never saw at any other time. Behind him, he heard a sound that made him turn around. Danny was crying. Not the loud, dramatic weeping of someone seeking attention, but the quiet, helpless tears of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. He was staring at the statue with an expression of wonder and terror, as if he were seeing something beautiful that he was afraid might disappear if he looked away. Marcus had fallen to his knees beside his overturned chair, his face buried in his hands. Kevin was simply standing, swaying slightly, his mouth open in an expression of shock, so complete it bordered on the comical. And in that moment, Jake understood something that all his education, all his reading, all his careful construction of rational arguments had never taught him. There are things in the world that exist beyond the reach of human understanding, and encountering them doesn't make you smarter or more sophisticated. It makes you smaller, humbler, and infinitely more aware of how little you actually know about the nature of reality. The statue continued to weep, and the scent of roses continued to fill the air, and the impossible silence continued to hold everyone in the bar in its gentle grip. Time seemed suspended, as if the entire universe had paused to witness this moment of grace breaking into the ordinary world of a neighborhood tavern. Finally, after what might have been minutes or hours, Maria stood up from behind the bar. She reached out with one trembling finger and touched one of the tears as it fell from the Virgin's eye. When she brought her finger to her lips, her face broke into a smile of such profound joy that everyone who saw it felt something shift inside their own hearts. "Thank you," she whispered to the statue, and her voice seemed to break the spell that had held the room in silence. Sound returned gradually. The whisper of traffic outside, the hum of the refrigeration units behind the bar, the distant sound of a train whistle from the rail yards 6 blocks away. But the scent of roses remained, and the statue continued to weep its impossible tears, and everyone in the final pour understood that they had witnessed something that would change them forever. Jake looked down at the empty glass in his hand, then carefully set it on the bar. When he looked up, Maria was watching him with eyes full of compassion rather than anger, forgiveness rather than condemnation. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words came out as barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand." Maria nodded slowly. "None of us understand, mijo. That's what makes it a miracle." One by one, the other customers approached the bar. Pete Novak pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his wallet and placed it carefully at the base of the statue, crossing himself as he had been taught as a child in the same Polish church his grandparents had helped build. Sandra Williams left her purse on her stool and knelt beside Maria, her nurse's hands folded in prayer for the first time since her daughter had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Danny approached slowly, his face still wet with tears, and placed a folded $50 bill next to Pete's 20. He didn't say anything, but his gesture was clear. An offering, a penance, a recognition that some things are too sacred to mock. Marcus and Kevin followed, emptying their wallets of cash and placing it at the statue's base like pilgrims leaving offerings at a shrine. The pile of money grew, but it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the intention behind it, the acknowledgement that they had witnessed something holy and wanted to honor it in the only way they knew how. As the night wore on, the tears gradually stopped flowing, though the scent of roses lingered for hours. The statue returned to its normal appearance, though somehow it seemed more beautiful than before, as if the miracle had awakened something that had always been there, but had never been fully visible. The story of what happened at the final pour that night spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, though not in the way such stories usually spread. There were no newspaper articles or television reports. Instead, it passed from person to person in whispered conversations, in hushed phone calls, in the kind of quiet testimony that comes from people who have seen something beyond their ability to explain, but not beyond their capacity to believe. Jake disappeared for several weeks after that night, though Maria later learned he had taken leave from his job and spent the time in a monastery in Wisconsin, not because he had suddenly become religious, but because he needed silence and space to process what he had experienced. When he returned to Milwaukee, he was a different person, quieter, more thoughtful, less eager to debate and argue about things he had once been certain he understood. He began coming to the final pour regularly, always alone, always ordering a single beer that he would nurse for an entire evening while sitting quietly at the end of the bar. He never talked about what had happened that night, but his presence had changed. The angry energy that had once surrounded him like an electrical field was gone, replaced by something softer and more contemplative. Sometimes, late in the evening when the bar was nearly empty, Jake would help Maria clean up, wiping down tables, stacking chairs, taking out the trash. He never asked for anything in return, and she never offered to pay him. It was simply something he needed to do, a way of making amends that went beyond words or money. The statue itself became something of a local pilgrimage site, though Maria was careful to maintain the bar's character as a neighborhood tavern rather than allowing it to become a tourist attraction. People would come from across the city to see the Virgin who had wept tears of transformed beer, but they came quietly, respectfully, understanding that they were entering a sacred space that happened to serve alcohol rather than an attraction that happened to be in a bar. Father Kowalski from St. Stanislaus, the Polish church 6 blocks away, came to see the statue and spent an hour talking with Maria about what had happened. He didn't declare it an official miracle. That wasn't his place, and the church had procedures for such things that involved years of investigation and analysis. But he blessed the statue and told Maria that God worked in mysterious ways, sometimes choosing the most unlikely places to reveal his presence. "Perhaps," he said, looking around at the bar with its cracked linoleum and faded beer signs, "this is exactly where people need to be reminded that the sacred is always present, even in places where we don't expect to find it." The final pour continued to operate as it always had, serving drinks to working people who needed a place to unwind after difficult days. But something fundamental had changed in its atmosphere. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. Disagreements were settled with words rather than threats. People looked out for each other in ways that went beyond the usual tavern courtesy. The statue watched over it all from her place behind the bar. No longer just a piece of folk art from Maria's mother, but a reminder that the divine is always present, always watching, always ready to transform even the most careless act of disrespect into an opportunity for grace. And late at night, when the last customer had gone home and Maria was counting the till, she would sometimes catch the faint scent of roses in the air and know that her mother's virgin was still watching over the place, still protecting the people who gathered there, still ready to weep tears of compassion for anyone who needed to be reminded that they were loved beyond their understanding and forgiven beyond their deserving. Jake never spoke publicly about what he had witnessed that night, but those who knew him could see the change. The man who had once delighted in tearing down other people's beliefs now spent his free time volunteering at a homeless shelter, serving meals to people who reminded him daily that dignity and faith often flourish in the most unlikely circumstances. And sometimes, when someone asked him why he had changed so dramatically, why he no longer seemed interested in debating religion or mocking believers, he would simply say that he had learned the difference between being clever and being wise, between knowing facts and understanding truth. "I used to think," he would tell them, "that faith was for people who were afraid to face reality. Now I think maybe reality is bigger than I ever imagined, and faith is for people who are brave enough to admit it." The statue of the Virgin of Guadalupe still stands behind the bar at the final pour, watching over the customers with the same expression of infinite compassion she has worn for decades. The paint has faded slightly with age, and there are tiny chips in the plaster that Maria carefully touches up from time to time. But those who were present that October night swear that sometimes, in certain light, you can still see traces of the tears she wept. Not physical marks on the plaster, but something deeper, a sense that this small statue has looked directly into the heart of human pain and responded with the only thing that can truly heal it: love that asks for nothing in return and forgives everything that came before. And Maria, now in her 70s, but still behind the bar most nights, still tells anyone who asks about the statue that it belonged to her mother, that it has watched over the bar for 43 years, and that it continues to remind everyone who sees it that grace can be found in the most unexpected places, offered to the most unlikely people, transforming even the most careless moments of cruelty into opportunities for redemption. She understands, Maria tells them, echoing the words her own mother spoke decades ago, the hearts of those who suffer. And sometimes, when we've forgotten how to hope, she helps us remember